Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Faros Weekly. Welcome back. Today, we will continue from where we stopped last time on the leadership coaching conversations. And the talk today is around engagement. This is for the executive you are coaching if they are not fully engaged or if they're lacking the capacity to engage the workforce. We will understand, we'll try to conceptualize now today what happens when there is disengagement and how we can overcome this in using simple techniques that can help us to address some of the issues that the executives is dealing with. Again, we're still on the leadership solutions series that we started. We developed a number of leadership programs. And what we're trying to do now is to create a suite of conversations that can help us in the coaching engagement that we are in to address issues that are relevant. And we try for the time being to focus on how I can create a level of confidence that can provide me with the presence required as an executive. So when I apply the variety of power bases that I have, I can cause an impact. This is really the whole topic that we're trying to address. Building a level of confidence and presence is the use of power that lead to an impact. And that is not an easy thing for someone who may actually have issues in presence or in the way they use power, in the way they impact the people around them and influence the people around them. So our focus is to create a number of conversations. Last week, we addressed two important issues. We addressed the issues around vulnerability and daring. And that's part of the concept that we shared last week, that our feeling that we are imperfect or the imperfections in us creates vulnerabilities. And all of us have our own vulnerabilities. Now, the problem with the vulnerability that once I'm vulnerable, I will avoid certain situation and I will not demonstrate the level of courage and confidence required. While if I can deal with vulnerability and I can actually encourage myself through dealing with vulnerability to dare and to have the courage, that will give me the confidence required to deal with difficult situations. So we talked about the myth around vulnerability and how to address it. And then we talked about the triggers, what triggered the daring process, and how, as a coach, I can use those triggers to help an individual I'm coaching with certain vulnerability to move on. So vulnerabilities and daring are the key towards courage and confidence. And that's what we discussed last week in our session around the issues of courage and how I can have the courage to move forward and deal with complex situations. So this is a summary of where we are, where we are at this point in time. And today we will address a new coaching conversation. I call it engagement first. Now, as we may know, engagement and disengagement is a major issue that actually organizations fail to address over the years. Very, very few organizations have this capacity to address the engagement issue, especially among large ones. Smaller ones or the micro ones may be easier. But once the organization is big enough, the issue around organization usually surface and it hits the leadership in the core. So today we will try to understand and conceptualize what the issue is and what's behind it and how we can address that. Now, the first thing is to understand when business people start to talk about their business and the challenge that they have, they usually focus on strategy and building the strategy and the system and the processes and the tactics around it to achieve results. All of this may be obviously something of value. The issue is unless you have a culture to support it, basically nothing will happen, as we all know. And as Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I have a situation that I will use today as an example of a large group of organizations, and I'm working with the CEO of the group CEO. He created a culture over the years. Has been CEO now for nearly 9 years. He created a culture in the place now that basically can be described as following. He's kind of a bully himself. He's the way he deals with people. But he's so kind that he actually promotes a culture of non-performance. So he does not reward performance, and he does not punish non-performance. So as a result of that, there is a culture there that among the employees and among management, senior management, that they are afraid of raising their heads up and speaking their mind because of his bully effect. But also they know if they do not perform, probably nothing bad will happen. That's the culture in the place. So he wanted to get out of this. So he decided to appoint a CEO for the group. And the CEO came from a strategy perspective. So someone who's very focused on strategy, and he understands exactly what's needed. So he walked in. He's now into the fifth or 6 months of his job. Within the first 3 months, he got his hands around the problems, he understood it, and he decided to focus on strategy development. Within a month, he developed a document called My First 90 Days, and he summarized what's required to be done. And basically, the board approved it, and he put it in front of everybody in a big presentation when he had all the senior managers from the 8 companies. And I was sitting in the back of the room, actually, myself. And there was something like at least 70 plus executives in the room. And I was sitting in the back just watching what's happening there. And I immediately can see culture eats a strategy for breakfast. People sitting there as if, we have seen this before, we have heard this before. No one is saying that, but I can see on their body language. And basically, immediately after the session, I took him aside and said, "Now we need to talk. It's not going to fly. I think the issue is a culture now. It's not strategy at all. It's a culture." And I've seen this real time myself a couple of weeks ago, actually, not that far. And I will be seeing him this week again to see, to maybe start to put together steps of how we are going to approach this. But what I'm trying to address here, that the engagement actually starts from the culture pace. And what we need to do instead of just driving strategies is to start to dive deeper into the culture. So we can, when we bring a strategy, we set a good environment and climate for it to succeed. Now, if it is the culture, which is all about the way we do things around here, how can I discover that as a coach? Like how, within the first few sessions as a coach, I can discover that quickly. What I'm going to cover with you now is a number of questions that help you actually to discover that easily. Questions like, what behaviors are rewarded or punished here? That's a very powerful question. The behaviors that are rewarded or punished here. That immediately will tell you whether we are driving performance or not. Where and how are people actually spending the resources, time, money, and attention? So we need to know how people invest their time and money and resources in general in this organization. And that can help the individual to think about where they put them with the resources actually, and is it for the right purpose? Another question to ask is, what rules and expectations are followed, enforced, and ignored? So if there are certain rules in the place or certain values in the place, are they followed? Are they enforced? Are they ignored or not? That's another important thing. Number 4, do people feel safe and supported talking about how they feel and asking for what they need? Now, any of these questions, you may get the positive answers because the right answer, of course, is obvious. But the best way as a coach is give me an example of something that happened lately. I need to conceptualize this in my mind. Give me an indication how frequently that happened. Probe. Do not just stop there. Probe. Give me an example. Give me something solid that demonstrate that this actually took place. So that's an important. Number 5 here, if there are any sacred resource cows, who are protected by management, uh, try to understand here. And I can tell you, in the organization I'm dealing with, I've seen all of that. I've seen all of that. Also, the initial answer was, no, 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 we have, like, especially around number 3, rules and expectations. He immediately picked the issue around values. And the values are on the wall. No, we had an exercise 2 years ago. We had a consultant here who helped us to formulate our values, and we agreed that these are the rules. And guess what's number 1 value on the list? Respect. And guess how he's known in the organization? A bully. So immediately you can see, the discrepancy between the rules and expectations, and you can bring this to their attention in the right time, or the right space, or the right way, of course. So questions like this help you start to explore what the culture is. Questions like, what stories are legend and what values do they convey? A story here that I have heard, that one of the employees made a mistake actually in an acquisition that cost the company $3 million. And the mistake was due diligence mistake. Now, the result of that, basically nothing. So a story that, cost the company money, no one learned anything, no one, not necessarily punished, but at least, have a serious talk about what needs to be done, or punished if it is due to, basically duty of care being neglected. So that's also valid. What happens when someone fails, disappoints, or makes mistakes? How we handle this? How is vulnerability, uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure perceived? If someone is vulnerable or feeling threatened, how we perceive that? Do we actually help them, or we just bully them? How prevalent are shame and blame, and how are they showing up in the organization? And then what's the collective tolerance of discomfort? Is the discomfort of learning, trying new things, and giving and receiving feedback normalized? So if we feel uncomfortable with change, if we feel uncomfortable with new things we're trying to bring, do we, try to find a way to normalize this and work through a process when we can collectively, handle the discomfort, or we basically stop and no, we're not going to try this? Issues like this, question like this, can really help you to paint a picture of the culture in the organization. And I will strongly recommend that you always ask for examples. Give me an example, something that happened lately, just to help them. This is not only for us, but for them as well, to understand what is happening around them, what's happening to them, what they are doing to others. And all of that can be helpful in the process of preparing for engagement. So once we understand the actual culture, and basically the culture in any organization is the collective norms and practices of the individual leaders. So the leader here will be in the heart of it, of course. Once we understand this, then we can address the issue of engagement or disengagement, or lack of engagement, which is disengagement. So how disengagement happens? Disengagement is the issue underlying majority of problems. Most of the issues in organization, whether it is people are not doing what they're supposed to do, or people are not thinking out of the box, or people are not creative enough, people are not taking accountability, being accountable or being responsible for their acts, all of that coming from engagement. Engagement in the heart of performance. And if engagement is not there, or disengagement is covering everything around us, then that in itself is a good reason why organization can fail in achieving the level of performance. So it is an underlying factor here in all problems. Now, we disengage to protect ourselves from vulnerability, shame, and feeling lost and without purpose. That's very important. These are a mix of things. Number one, vulnerability. I know that my boss is a bully, and I know that if I go in front of them, probably they will bully me. So what I will do, I will avoid. the interaction. I'll avoid, the engagement piece. Or I've done something wrong and I know that will be hard on me, so I feel ashamed. So I'm trying to disengage for a while. Or I don't see a purpose in this organization. I just don't see myself adding value. And I saw this in many organizations. One of them was a university unit in one of the universities we're working with, where basically the entire workforce in the engagement survey scored very, very low. And it was the accounting department of the university. And when I started to interview them, the employee basically are telling me they get bullied by the professors and by the teaching staff, and they feel they are not adding any value to the organization. So the focus here was how to help them to find purpose, and to engage them again. And we did that actually over a 6 months exercise. So the disengagement here can be due to vulnerability, feeling ashamed, feeling without purpose. All of that can lead into disengagement. The other reason that leads into disengagement, when we feel like the people who are leading us aren't living up to their end of the social contract. So the example I give you early on about the CEO and the respect piece that he has as number one value in the organization while he bully everybody, that in itself is a social contract. We signed a social contract when we had a consultant here 2 years ago, and we wrote our values, and you didn't live to those values. So as a result of that, basically, I feel that you haven't lived, respected that social contract, and you really didn't live up to, to it. So I will disengage. So these are the main reasons why we disengage. And leaders need to understand this. If they are disengaged themselves, probably it's the top reason, probably. If the people are disengaged themselves, probably it's a mix of number one and two. So we need to conceptualize this in our mind and understand it. Now, the question to ask here, do we intentionally create cultures in our organization that feel disengagements and disconnection? Do we intentionally do that? Do I wake up in the morning, go to work, and decide that today I'm gonna behave and create a culture that basically fuel everybody to disengage and disconnect and stop? Of course not. Of course not. Why I will do that? So how does it happen, and where is the gap? How does it happen, and there is a gap, and we need to understand the gap. The way it happens is very simple. We can give people what we don't have. And sometimes we think we have it. Or sometimes we know we don't have it, but we strive for it. So we, under the illusion that we are going to have it, and we start to tell people that we are going to have it, or we have it, or we are on our way to have it. So we can give people what we don't have. If I'm a bully and I promise people respect, then definitely I am promising something I don't have. So the first thing is to recognize this space. There is a gap here between what I have and what I do. And it's important that we understand the gap, what I have and what I do. And between what I have and what I do is the space or the gap that people can see clearly. Our practice values, what are actually doing, thinking and feeling. And that's very important. That in itself is a coaching conversation. So if somebody are telling me, no, I value integrity. What do you think about integrity? What are your thoughts about it? What do you feel about it? What are your feelings about it? Do you feel proud when you bully someone? Because the answer is to this question, which I asked actually came like, yeah, but you don't understand, Wade. I mean, it's common sense, and they're still making the same mistake. So you hear these answers and immediately see how they feel. They believe it's common sense that, for people to perform at a certain level. And then you start to talk about expectations and other things to do is how to drive that forward. So our practice values here, what we are actually doing, thinking and feeling, versus our aspiration values, what we want to do, think and feel, is a coaching conversation when we pass all these gates around understanding the culture. Once we understand the culture that the individual is putting in place, we need now to drive a conversation to help them to differentiate between the practiced values that they actually do and think and feel every day about their people, about the business, about themselves, versus what they preach in meetings, in front of people, in their emails and their value statements and their strategy documents. And they put this. There is a gap here. And what they also need to understand that people are smart enough to see this gap. The problem, most of the executives, they feel that they can put this mask and they can behave in a way that to make people believe that they are what they're trying to tell them that they are. But actually, people can see through this clearly, because if people see them when they talk, people see them when they interact with others, people see their body language, their doings. So all of that can actually help, to inform people around the gap between their practice values and their aspiration values. And I think this is maybe the most valuable coaching conversation a coach can have with their client, to be able to dive deep into this, what they actually practice and what they actually say they want to practice, or they are practicing. And that's an important question to ask. Now, once we get to this question, we are in the heart of the application of coaching here. So questions I will ask, and I will make sure that it's clear to individuals we're dealing with. Learning how to engage with vulnerability is important. Learning how to understand that this engagement, when it's coming from, whether it is because of culture or others, is important. But what we need to ensure here, that we have this conversation about what you stand for as a leader today, what sort of value, what sort of purpose you're fulfilling here, and how that demonstrates itself in your behaviors. What do you tell people that you stand for, and are they engaged? And if they are not engaged, why? Then we deal with the two areas of vulnerabilities and the shame feeling, which is important, or the fact that they don't like what they see. They don't like what they see because they can actually see the gap. They can see the gap between the practice values and the aspiration values of the lead. And then if there's any vulnerability associated with this, with the gap, is important. Vulnerable, to feel ashamed. I'm vulnerable to feel, not meeting the expectations. I'm vulnerable, for anything I'm vulnerable about, or my people are vulnerable about. What are the vulnerabilities and how we can handle them, using the issues we discussed last week around the myth around vulnerability first, to dissolve it and get it out of the way, and then move to the second topic, which is about the triggers for daring, how to trigger someone to dare, to have the courage and confidence to move forward. And this is how we deal with the vulnerability here. And then what we can do about it. And then we move into solution focus mode that can help us to move forward, So that's also an important piece. Now that's the application of engagement, and we'll talk about the how piece more over the next couple of discussions, because that's really the concept and the recipe for it. But there are a couple of other pieces that will complement this in terms of the how piece in the workplace, and how we can approach this in an effective manner. So that's the concept that I wanted to share with you today, with the coaching conversations to go with it. And I hope that you find this useful in your coaching practice. I will pause here to see if you have any conversations, and we'll be able to take your questions